All right, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're excited to introduce you to ways that you can connect your workforce with AI-powered multilingual communications today. So thank you for joining. Let us know where you're hopping in from in the chat as well. And excited to speak with you all today. Just a couple housekeeping notes to kick us off. So we're currently using the Zoom platform. If you want to interact with our speakers, please feel free to use the chat function at any point, enter any thoughts you have, get a dialogue going, all that good stuff. And you can use the Q&A box as well to enter questions throughout the presentation. That's the best way to make sure that we see your questions and we get those answered for you. And we'll save time at the end so we get to as many questions as possible. And then, of course, after the webinar, we'll be sending out this recording to you all and everyone who registered. So no worries if you're not able to attend the whole thing, or if you want to review anything afterward or share it with a colleague, you can absolutely do so. So to introduce our speakers today, my name is Heather Bicknell, and I'm a Director of Product Marketing here at Poppulo, and my focus is really launching new offerings that help communicators drive greater impact for their organizations. And I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by two of our experts, Sanjay and Dave. Let's start with some quick intros. Sanjay, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Heather. Great to be here. So Sanjay Rakshit, I've been doing, oh God, over 26 years in technology and product. Um, a lot of that in AI. Back in the day when AI wasn't in vogue. Thankfully, it's back in. So I have a job. But no, it's a pleasure to be here and talk about how AI and Gen AI can drive translations into the next level.
Awesome. And Dave, would you like to do a quick intro?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And folks, lovely to see you all here. David Walsh, I'm a sales engineer here at Poppulo. So my responsibilities are typically kind of providing functional and technical demonstrations, answering use cases, understanding challenges that our customers have. And I usually speak to 25 or 30 customers a week just to understand those in a bit more detail. And today we'll be taking you through some of the multilingual capabilities that Heather described. But lovely to see you all here.
Great. So today's agenda, we're going to share some insights into the current state of multilingual internal communications, some of the things we've learned over the years doing this with customers ourselves. And then we're going to cover how AI has really dramatically changed over the last few years and the new opportunities that presents to sort of take automation, give it another look and explore the new opportunities that it presents for global organizations. Then we will give you a sneak peek into how we've applied AI into our own Poppulo employee communications platform. And that's what Dave will provide a short demo of in the second half of the presentation. And then finally, we will save some time at the end for plenty of Q&A. So get those questions going. But to make sure that we're tailoring the content for you all today, we wanted to kick off with a quick poll just to help us understand what multilingual communications currently looks like for you. So maybe, regarding official or corporate communications, do you send them all of the time in all languages when relevant? Maybe you have a legal obligation to do so. Are you sending multilingual communication sometimes, but it's not a consistent practice across your organization? Do you only translate when it's critical news or kind of major updates that you need to make sure there's no misunderstandings involved? Perhaps it's something your organization isn't doing now, but you have reasons to consider it in the future, such as planning for a merger acquisition with a company in a different geography than yours, or do you not have a multilingual requirement and you're just curious to learn more about advancements in AI. Love to know where everyone is at today in their journeys. All right, so this is really interesting. So 46% today are translating content, but not doing it consistently. And this is something we see kind of frequently as well. kind of surprising to see that no, but it's something we're exploring. And I think that we are also seeing this trend more and more around, you know, how language factors in, how native languages factor into the employee experience. So really interesting to see this mix today, and just a small percentage are all the way there today, which is great. So, okay, thank you for participating in that poll and letting us know where you're at in your journey. So, having worked with hundreds of organizations who have multilingual requirements at Poppulo, we've observed that there's a spectrum of needs, and I think we just saw it reflected in that poll as well when it comes to translating internal communications for employees. So sometimes, as I mentioned, it might be a legal requirement, in which case, you know, you don't really need to question when and why to translate messages. You just have to do it. But often what we see is that the lines aren't so clear. You know, you might have a pocket of employees who speak a different language than the majority of the company, or maybe you have an operating business language in a certain geography, but you know that employees' native languages are actually much more diverse. So you might be wondering by now what these numbers on the screen mean. And these are just some fun facts to get our conversation going today. So did you know that there are currently over 7,000 spoken and sign languages in use today? And of those, just 150 to 200 are spoken by more than 1 million people. And you here on this call are among the 17% of the global population who speak English. And just a small percentage, less than 5% of people are native English speakers. And I share those stats with you. And I think this quote from Nelson Mandela really perfectly sums up why translating internal communications does matter, not just for the performance of IC messaging, but the overall employee experience. And he said that if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. So this is all just to demonstrate how language isn't purely functional, but it also plays a deep part in accessibility, inclusion, and belonging for employees. So, you know, even though it can be quite a task, as we see it, it does make a big difference. So earlier this year, we set out to explore, you know, really how automation and AI were making a difference in terms of how our own customers were addressing this challenge. So we surveyed a subset of our customer base to better understand how they're addressing translation needs today. They could select as many methods as applied to their processes, their workflow. And the most popular methods we saw were folks are relying on multilingual employees to help out. So it's sort of something that employees within the organization are, you know, tasked to do as a side gig, as well as outsourced translation services came in as the other top method there, likely a combination of those methods as well. And then AI translations are already in the mix as the third most common, and respondents were using really a mixture of tools. They mentioned things like Google Translate, ChatGPT, DeepL, and kind of other new and emerging models. And then a quarter of respondents also use Poppulo's multilingual email templates. And those allow communicator to input articles in multiple languages and make that all through one send. And a little under 1 in 4 communicators actually have dedicated in-house translators. So a mixture of methods, but I think overall we're still seeing predominantly manual translation methods. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the top challenges that we saw when it comes to translating content, really the top one goes back to the main drawback of manual methods is that translations simply take too long. So respondents reported, you know, as short as 2 hours per email to as long as, you know, waiting 1 month for translations to come back. And when we think about, you know, the speed of updates and, messages out to employees that you need to be communicating today, having to wait a month to delay an announcement is quite significant. The other top challenge that we saw was poor translation quality, and we're going to talk about this quite a bit today. But some notes were, translations don't catch things like idioms. Maybe they have poor grammar, there are errors, kind of other quality concerns. And then the third greatest challenge was cost. And we saw, upwards of tens of thousands of dollars a year that teams are spending to translate their content for employees. So those were some of the top challenges reported. So, the top really challenge we're all facing here when it comes to translations is ultimately time. And you're probably feeling that pressure even more today than maybe a few years ago. So this slide is inspired by a Gartner presentation that I attended recently, and it really stuck with me. And I think it perfectly sums up how stakeholder expectations are changing in this new era of technology. So on the left, we have our comms leader, and they're prioritizing, an incoming stakeholder request, saying that her team can deliver the work next week, right? Sounds perfectly reasonable. And on the right, we have this quizzical fellow who's secretly thinking to himself, hey, wait, why do I need to wait a week when AI could do this for me today? So I think, we might all increasingly be feeling this new set of expectations and this AI phenomenon. And just to put another point on that, Gartner had surveyed CEOs to see, what are their expectations? What are they looking for generative AI to add on in terms of productivity? What Gartner found was that leaders expect a more than 7x jump in workforce productivity, so quite significant. But really, whatever the gain turns out to be, there's no denying the pressure to explore the potentials of this new technology. And your business partners and other functions are also under those same expectations to move faster and get more done. And I think this highlights really two risks that communicators need to be aware of. One is really the perceived reduction in value communications might add to the organization, if content delivery is the main mechanism for providing value today. And then the second risk is, of course, inconsistent or inappropriate messages that are created without sufficient oversight. So we all know that AI can be inaccurate, it can hallucinate, it can make up facts, it can cite sources that don't exist. So that just highlights why it's really important as communicators that you're on the front lines of responsible AI efforts within your organizations, and why the future of internal communications value lies more and more in making sure to provide the strategy and not just content generation. So we have another poll question, and this is to see where everyone's at on their AI journey today. So just a basic one, have you used AI for internal communications content development within the last 6 months? Yes, no, maybe you're kind of unsure if you used an AI tool or it's been so long. Let us know. We'll just give that a few seconds to run. All right, so we're seeing 77% of attendees are a yes and 23% are no. So just stick that 77% number in your head, because we wanted to sort of measure over time how this is changing. And these were the responses when we ran the same question a little over a year ago. So we're seeing a jump from 50 to 77%. So I think that just goes to show that, more and more it is becoming prevalent in our work styles and our working lives as we look for ways to be more efficient, really. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sanjay, and he's going to share more with you about really the opportunity that AI presents and get into how the machine translation landscape has evolved. So over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Heather. So AI has been around for a while. It went through what we call was lots of research in the 80s, early 90s, and then the AI winter. Around that time, there were no resources, and then resources, computing power became cheap or cheaper, and it came back to life, and it's now everywhere. So generative AI is a field of AI, is a subdivision of AI. And what is it for? It's to generate content. That's the name is the giveaway, isn't it? It's one of the most popular applications of AI today. LLMs are what we know, which is ChatGPT, or GPT is the LLM. ChatGPT is the front end to it. Gemini. These LLMs have pretty much changed the way content is generated today. They are trained on large amount of textual data. We also now have video and we've image data, image generators, which are then trained on audio, video, and image training data. And they are large because they've got lots of parameters. And what I mean by parameters is lots of, for want of a better word, probabilities that are used to generate the content. So they are quite huge to store and run, very expensive to run. But why are they popular? They're popular because up until 2 years ago, one could tell that it was a machine that was generating content. Never passed the Turing test. But in November 2022, with ChatGPT, it passed the Turing test, which means that one couldn't tell whether a content was being generated by humans or by a machine. And that pretty much opened the floodgates to the popularity of generative AI. So November 2022, ChatGPT comes along, and now we've got almost everyone using ChatGPT or trying it out, trying to figure out what can it do. The possibilities were seemingly endless at the time. But one area that it really helped shape a shift in a user behavior is content generation. So it's generative AI, LLMs generated content, and how do we generate content? So currently, what we do is we create content. So we blank piece of paper, go write something, send it out to our peers for review or customers for review. And once the review comes through, we say, okay, let's edit or fine tune it. And then finally, once it passes the final review, we go and publish it. What generative AI has done is help move this further by one step by generating the content. So where the shift is happening is it's it's is becoming a balance of let's create or let's generate, which is more of a curate. Let's curate the content, generate the content, review it. It's quicker to always review an existing content, isn't it? So review, then fine tune it, and then publish it. What that is doing right now is allowing our users or users of generative AI to focus on the creativity. Whereas before it took a bit of time to get the content ready, to create it. Now, because with the help of Gen AI, we are able to generate the content, the first pass, if you like, we could then focus on the content, the creativity aspect of it, the actual delivery of that content, the fine tune. So we could now focus on what we really like to do the most, which is the creative aspect of content generation. But also, it, as Heather mentioned, it increases the amount of content that can be created. So now there's a huge improvement in productivity, in the quality, purely because we were able to have a starting point provided by Gen AI. So with that in mind, what opportunity that does Gen AI provide in communications or to a communicator? What's in it for a communicator, really? The first thing that comes to mind is hyper-personalization. Now, I said come to mind, but this is becoming very um, prevalent in communication, because in order for communication to land or to be most effective, we have to understand our audience. We know that already. But now, with so much of data being available and the ability of Gen AI to detect patterns within that data or diverse, unstructured data. We are able to understand the target recipients, and with the use of its content creation power, create content that are tailored towards target recipients. And it could be emails, could be posts, could be articles, could be feeds, could be anything really. But the idea here is we hyper personalize so that we are able to communicate effectively with the target recipients by understanding the way they think, the way they consume content, and the way they respond to content. And this can be moderated by the organization's tone of voice, branding, and practices. So Gen AI can be used to generate content, but also to follow the best practices of an organization, the tone of voice, and can also change or can also adapt the content based on the target audience for more effective communication. So that's the hyper personalization bit. But then there's also the data that's coming back from the the users, the recipients, as well as the communicators. And that becomes very important to understand. So data analysis and insights, they inform how to hyper-personalize content. So they go hand in hand. And that is the other two pillars that Gen AI pretty much, the opportunities in Gen AI stand on. So where does AI translation fit into all that? Well, first of all, translation in itself, as Heather mentioned earlier, comes with its own challenges. And the first one is pretty much the linguistic aspect of it. There is a translation between two languages to sound natural. They have to incorporate the linguistic characteristics and the patterns and the behaviors of the target language. So source language could be anything, English to, let's say, French. French is a target language. There are challenges with the multiple meanings of words, polysemy, call it, the tone of voice. Something said in one language could mean something completely different in the same tone in another language. That becomes important. Dialect, natural fluency. And then we have got low resource languages, languages that aren't widely used. So how does translation cater and to all these challenges? How does it fulfill these challenges? So AI attempted to do that, and it's been so there are various ways. There's been an evolution of how translation has been addressed by AI. So the first one is in AI, when machine translates, we call it machine translation. And the first method is using neural networks. So we call it the neural machine translation, NMT. Google Translate, Amazon Translate. There are many translation services that uses neural networks to translate. So these NMTs are specialized for translation. They always have been, and they've been around for a while. And they're very accurate. But what they make up or they provide in accuracy and contextual understanding, they also kind of fall in the fluency, the linguistic characteristics. So they can be very dry. Pretty much, imagine they've got no sense of humor, really. They don't convey the sentiment. They don't. They look like they're generated by a machine. So in short, they don't pass the Turing test. You can tell that this has been generated by a machine. It doesn't work in communication. But they're speedy, they don't cost that much, highly cost efficient, and these systems were very easy to integrate with applications. But then came the LLMs, ChatGPT, Gemini, too much generative AI. Now that is a content generator. So by default, the content generated by LLMs were a lot more fluent, much more natural sounding. They had the language patterns, the structures, the linguistic aspects of it. So they were excellent, and they could create content that was fantastic, and they could generate all kinds of content, but they could hallucinate. What they didn't understand, or they didn't know how to translate, they would create their own. So although their translations read very well, they weren't really accurate, or they wouldn't convey the meaning of the original text. So they were, well, what we discovered is that they are very good at paraphrasing. So as long as the language remains the same, the task is generation of content. If you give them something and said, please paraphrase it and make it sound human, they would do an excellent job. So how do we combine the efficiency and the accuracy of machine translation models, which is NMT, and LLMs to provide a translation that works for all? And that is GenAI translation. We combine NMT and LLM to provide accurate translations, the fluency and the nuanced expressions, idioms, and content, or the translations that contain a broader cultural and linguistic styles and knowledge. And that gives us the accurate and natural sounding translations. The key thing in translation is to pass the Turing test, because that is where we realize that nobody likes a machine translation and sounding like a machine. We know it's a machine translating, but if it sounds natural and fluent, we accept that translation. Thank you. So with that aspect, what's next in AI translation? It's multimodal. We talked about text, and now we're looking at how can we extend that to video, audio, images. So let's move from text to speech, where users can look at a piece of content and request it to be spoken back in a language of their choice. They can summarize them in a language of their choice. I said translate audio, video. Captioning in an image, where they've got an image where they can look at how that image can be described or captioned in a language of their choice. And the emerging trends that are coming through in translation are now real-time translation. So while we are listening, or while, let's take this webinar for instance, I'm speaking in English, but this could be real time translated to a language of your choice. So that is what's coming up now. And then the one that is in active research right now, it's not a solved problem yet, but how to detect content where the words are transliterated, which means that they're written, they're a different language, but they're written in English or a particular language, and they have to remain in the translation. And what should be translated? So that hybrid piece is where we are figuring out how AI can help us detect what should be translated and what shouldn't be in some text. So that, to me, when I said thank you earlier on, is to say that we had natural translations, we love that. AI translation, the next frontier is multimodal. So text, now what's coming up is how do we extend that to different types of content.
Thanks so much, Sanjay. It's really kind of fascinating and rapidly evolving field. Just as I was watching the Microsoft Ignite keynote yesterday, I saw that they were showing off in Teams sort of that real-time video conferencing translation. And, just think about the opportunities really that poses for organizations to take, more and more advantage of talent from all over the world without language being a barrier. I mean, just to go back to the stats I shared at the beginning, only 17% of the world speaks English and under 5% speak English natively. So I think there's, a lot of exciting opportunities when it comes to how AI can help us overcome language barriers and better connect both, personally and professionally. So just to kind of sum up the AI opportunity here, again, looking at the top translation challenges that we discussed earlier, the time challenge, the quality, and then also cost is a major factor as well, particularly for communications teams who might not have a lot of budget and are looking for, ways to reclaim some of that cost. So I think as we look across these challenges and reflect on what Sanjay shared about what AI can do for us today, I think the benefits here are clear. So really, with the time element, we can reduce the time it takes to turn around translations from weeks or kind of the up to a month number that we saw earlier to down to minutes. So that's kind of an obvious productivity gain there. The other one that's pretty, apparent are cost savings as well, right? Not needing to have that manual translation service for all of the content that could possibly be translated. I think this also goes back to, what we saw in the initial poll, that consistency of translation and having that be more embedded as part of the employee experience. Automation is a way that makes that achievable when you're sending out such volume of communications. And then I think the sticking point for AI has been quality. And I think that, as Sanjay has shared, the way that, technology is coming together to leverage the best of different models together, sort of that speed and accuracy of the NMTs, along with the nuances that language models, generative AI can bring to the table, presents a really exciting opportunity to, achieve translations, machine translations that sound more and more native, more and more natural, which of course is the ultimate goal, to provide, equal access to communications, no matter what language your employees are speaking. So exciting opportunities there. And just wanted to highlight, when thinking about translating content across your organizations, that it's not an all or nothing situation either. And I think it's important to think about, scenarios that you might find AI approaches working better for some circumstances than others. So this is just sort of a general guideline, to think about the kinds of communications that you're sending out in your organization, and where, manual methods or more human oversight are kind of more important than other types of communication. So, of course, if there's something involving legal documentation, if, it's crisis communications, for example, I think that, or things like health and safety messaging, it's really important that, of course, accuracy is paramount there. And I think there's also, the need, particularly in crisis conversations, that there's the humanity to it, and that even just having that as part of the process, ensures that, it's sort of handled appropriately. I think about a situation that it was in the news a few years ago, sort of at the advent of ChatGPT, and there was a school shooting at a university near where I'm at, and there was a response from another university, and at the bottom of their kind of memo, reflecting on the tragedy, it said something like, this content was generated by AI. And I think that was kind of a mistake. Someone had left that in, but I think that just highlights that, when it's a sensitive communication, that, more manual oversight is absolutely needed from that perspective. And then I think there's, in the middle, you might find situations where more cultural nuance is needed to review content before it goes out. So I have this example. I spoke with a customer recently. It's not a translation example, but I think it just goes to show how cultural nuance makes such a big difference in the employee experience. So this customer, they've done a campaign into employees, and as part of the activation of that campaign, they had a really fun theme going, but essentially they were sending tomato products out to kind of generate hype for this communications campaign that was ongoing. And they realized that, not every region that they were, engaging employees in had the same relations with different tomato products. So they made sure to customize, whether it's tomato juice or salsa or kind of whatever they were sending out to the offices to get employees kind of curious about the campaign reflected that kind of region's association with a given tomato product. So I think that just goes to show kind of that there are, cultural nuances where, human touch really does make a big difference for more meaningful engagement. And then, of course, on the more automated side, think about situations where automation is more, acceptable. There's less risk, right? Things like routine updates, things where, again, that large volume of communications, is it better to get 90% of the way there and reach more people versus not having any access at all? So I think, there are trade-offs along the way, but just a way to think about establishing your own standards based on the needs of your organization, particularly as you pilot AI and new solutions. So kind of with that, wanted to introduce you to how we're thinking about AI at Poppulo and what that looks like inside of our platform today. Just a really brief overview of Poppulo if you're not familiar with us. So, we provide communication software for over 4,500 organizations. Those organizations are reaching more than 50 million employees worldwide. You can create, publish, and measure internal communications on our platform across all of the channels you see here from one centralized platform, which is underpinned by enterprise-grade governance and security. So that is what our AI models are built on top of. And last year, we introduced the start of our new intelligence layer into our platform, which we've dubbed Poppulo AI. And there's really three key pillars of this solution. One is the creation element. So content assistance that can streamline writing, editing, publishing, a lot of the use cases that Sanjay touched on as well. Recommendations is a growing area. So this is applying additional personalization layer for communicators and employees alike. So today we kind of include automated translations in that bucket of personalization, enhancing the employee experience. In the future, this is another area that we'll be building on more and more for, using the best of AI to provide best practice recommendations and, unlock greater personalization. And then finally, insights. So automatically identifying content themes, analyzing content attributes to provide intelligent insight into what's resonated with employees. So that's sort of where we're at today. And we're adding more and more AI to help kind of overcome that burden of analyzing all of your data as well to get to insight faster. So those are some of the things that we're doing at Poppulo. And before I hand it over to Dave for a demo, I just wanted to reiterate and take a moment to highlight the AI principles that Poppulo is building on, and these form the foundation of our AI development. So the first is responsible AI. So at Poppulo, we choose AI services that are built to ensure fairness, inclusivity, transparency, and accountability to prevent bias. We don't use customer data to train our models, and customers also have the option to opt in or out of AI features to meet the needs and standards of their organizations. We develop AI to be assistive. So we believe that AI is more, it's an assistant, and that humans and AI together are more powerful than either alone. So to that end, we've focused on building AI into our tools in ways that are meaningfully enhancing the communicator and the employee experience as well, such as accelerating the generation of engaging content and translations. And last but not least, governance. So governed AI is critical for scaling communications programs while maintaining a consistent brand and message. So by building AI directly into our tools and our workflows, with our access control framework, means that customers can benefit from Poppulo's robust governance, while also providing a consistent experience and standards across the organization, which is critical when adopting new technology and deciding, who gets to use different components of it. So all of that's possible with Poppulo. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing here, and I will turn it over to Dave, who's going to show you what this actually looks like in action. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Heather. And you should just be seeing my screen there now. And as you described a couple of minutes ago, that Poppulo platform in general, obviously, it's made up of more than just email. But we're just going to focus on the email auto translate at the start for a couple of minutes and look at some of the AI translation behind the scenes for you as communicators, but also for the thousands of employees that are receiving these communications in their inboxes or in those various different channels. With the inclusion of email auto translate this year, we now support translations across all of those internal communications channels. So email, as you see, but also into digital signage, into our mobile app, and also into the Microsoft 365 destinations also. So any channel that an employee may receive that communication can now be translated into their preferred language. And as we saw in that poll earlier on, lots of organizations obviously have varying levels of translation capabilities. And as a result, something like this, which is a newsletter delivered into people's inboxes in English, may have been the standard or may continue to be the standard. And we don't know the best engagement we're getting as a result of that. Now, what we're including in this email auto translate is, in addition to this standard email, we also have at the top here this banner called Read in Your Preferred Language. And what that's going to allow your recipients to do is open this up in a web version and say, English isn't my preferred language. I want to read that in French, or I want to read that in Spanish, or whatever languages you dictate as your communications team that your recipients will want to read these communications in. So just making sure we're getting those incremental gains on our communications, making sure we get that read rate up because our employees have an expectation of how this communication is delivered into their native languages there. Just to go behind the scenes on how this works in practice, as you can see here, I have one of my emails, that email we just sent out there, and I also have a list of all of those languages that I want to translate our communications into. So when we come in, we set our default language. In this case, we're communicating by default in English, but we very simply press our translate button, and that goes through the process of translating all of our content into those 10 different languages. Typically, this doesn't take more than 30 seconds to a minute, just getting all of those translations built into those 10 languages that we have selected there. From here, of course, we're very conscious that obviously once those translations are done, we can take a look at all of them. So we can see, for example, how it looks in English, but also when we want to look in Czech, how that looks, and it'll visualize that and render that in Czech here as an example. So it not only translates the content, but also translates all of the surrounding UI, like the like button and the comment button and the month and the title and things like that. So just making sure it's an even deeper experience for those recipients there as well. What we can also do is make sure that when we create this content, that we have the ability to amend content if we want to. Now, why this might be relevant, we may have business language or business terminology that's not appropriate to be translated. So we can come in here to the English version and amend something, have a look at the Czech version and amend something slightly again, just to make sure that we're keeping that content, keeping that context that's relevant for us as an individual business there as well. This is obviously the initial approach where each employee comes in and selects their preferred language, but we also have what is a step further than that, which is linking that up with your people data. So every single employee, you have your email address, of course, you have your first name in your department, but additionally within Poppulo, we can have this preferred language field. So this may be, for example, Adam over here, his preferred language is French. When I press the send button, that is automatically sent to Adam in French. He doesn't need to take that interim step to deliver it. It's automatically going to remove that step for him. And again, we can start to build up that preferred language field and that preferred language data over time, just to give people a slightly better experience when they open up the mail in their mailbox. So when I get this message here, it's personalized to Jamie, for example, but when one of my colleagues open it up, you can see David's version on the right and Brian's version on the left. Brian gets this in French because that was his preferred language. David gets this in German because that was his preferred language. So just again, using the data that we have on hand as an organization to give employees a slightly better experience as we continue on here. Email, obviously newsletters is what we're focusing on here. We've also branched out into those flyer style communications that we're sending out. But also when we look at those other channels that Heather mentioned, we of course have that translation across the board. So if I'm someone coming into my Microsoft Teams environment, that is automatically going to be translated into my language of preference, in this case into French. If I come into the Poppulo mobile app, that's going to work exactly the same. I open up my mobile app, I select my preferences, all of the content and the UI is all translated automatically. And finally, as we mentioned, and probably one of the biggest use cases we see is that digital signage translation. So we have the ability to post those same articles that we're sending on email and our Teams and our mobile app onto digital signage. And as you can see over here on the left, they are automatically being translated to our colleagues in Spain in Spanish. So using the feeds that we have, using the data that we have to give everyone a good experience, irrespective of the channel that they consume it on. But just can wrap up, folks, all of those translation capabilities across all of those different channels, and email being the one released this year. Heather, I'll pass it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Dave. Always great to see it in action. And as with that, we see some questions coming in. So I see a couple questions in the Q&A asking about whether this feature is available for all Poppulo customers or they don't see it today. And yes, it's so, you know, the approach that we're taking at Poppulo is that we don't turn AI on without your consent as an organization. So it is something that needs to be switched on depending on what package you're currently on. You may or may not be entitled to this feature currently, but it is included in our newest packages. So have a chat with your CSM if you're not sure, or reach out to a Poppulo representative, and happy to explore if this is something that can be turned on today. And kind of with that, we have another poll. So if you're interested, you know, if you need some help as a current Poppulo customer, maybe you're not a customer today and you're interested in learning more, let us know and we'll use that to follow up with you. Okay, great. See a few other language or questions just sort of related to how things work. So how many languages are supported? Kevin's asked that in the chat. So currently with the email side of the platform, we are supporting 10 of the most popular requests, but that's something that our product team is taking, you know, customer needs and suggestions for. So it's definitely a list that's going to grow over time. We are doing, we have a testing methodology that we use called blue scoring, and that just makes sure that the kind of models that we're using to produce a translation, that's our way of verifying that it's sort of human quality. So there are just some things with, you know, character-based languages, more kind of Sanjay mentioned some of those kind of lower volume languages. So we just like to make sure that the translation quality that we're adding into our product is really good enough and that it's going to meet those use cases. So we just kind of verify and test as we go, but definitely adding more languages over time. Another question, if I have 100,000 people I'm emailing, can I put preferred language by country versus by person? Dave, do you have a view on kind of data enrichment? We had another question about
Yeah.
How to manage that side.
We considered it, I think, Kevin, during the product development. It's probably the next iteration of this. I think that we kind of assume because you're based in Spain that your preferred language is going to be Spanish. It's not there at the moment, but I think to your point, that makes a bit more sense, I suppose, from a delivery perspective when we're scaling this up to the likes of 100,000 people, that we kind of make the assumption first and then let people choose past that point, you know. But at the moment, it's kind of an opt-in, I suppose we could call it, and then in the future, it's going to be linked to things like your country data or your preferred language data from a HR system, for example. But that's again something that we'll feed back to the product team because it is a very valid use case there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, there's a question in the Q&A, what method can you recommend to collect the language preference field? So I actually have, you know, a preference kind of system within Poppulo that you could send out to your users or your employees to collect that data and then add it back into your people data. So it is possible to sort of do that enrichment. And that's one way. I think, there are a couple ways we're trying to tackle it. So one is to that kind of drop down method that Dave showed. Of course, it'd be preferable if you receive it right in your inbox or at your endpoint in the language of your choice. And in the case of our integrations in the Microsoft ecosystem and our mobile application, users do receive that the content in their language of choice that's set up in their, if they have their Microsoft Teams in Spanish, they will receive the content in Spanish if translation is turned on. Just the way that email works is a little bit different. So we're exploring ways that we could, kind of save that preference over time in the inbox. But for now, it is kind of possible to collect that data inside of Poppulo as well, and then use it to enrich those people data lists that you're using if language isn't already a field there. Question, and maybe Dave, you could speak a little bit to the kind of approval workflow that we have with email today. But for internal reviewers who aren't in the communications department, is there a way to allow them access for review and edit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we do have like a send for test feature. We do have kind of a send for approval feature as well built into the platform there that people can come in those various different languages and leave comments and feedback if it's specific to them or if it's going via them for approval. So yes, Ignacio, yes, that is built into the platform there.
And is this possible to add a glossary per language for common terms and translations? So, we in the current state, based on customer feedback, we aren't training our models on customer data. That's sort of the approach we've taken now as folks are just really getting used to Gen AI. Policies are still being established within organizations, but we are exploring kind of ways that it could be sandboxed, or you could bring your own models into the equation to sort of make some of that personalization more possible for your business. So if you are a Poppulo customer and you're sort of interested in being involved in some of that feedback, definitely reach out and be happy to connect with your product team and see what are your use cases, what other AI tools are you maybe using today, and what are some ways that we could get that that brand and the unique terms your organization uses incorporated, so that you're not sort of finding the need to edit those every time as a communicator. It's sort of a delicate balance, right? We want to make sure that everyone, that the AI privacy and security and all of that is up to snuff for enterprises, but also of course want to make sure that the experience gets better and better. So we're exploring different ways to do that sort of as the technology evolves. Another question, does the system leverage translation memory to keep improving in future translations? So I think I just sort of answered that on the sort of individual level, but I would say that the models themselves are, continuously improving over time. And we're sort of, again, with that scoring methodology that I mentioned, when we, look at what kind of models to use for, the service that we provide within our own product, that they themselves continue to get better and better. And we continue to, make sure that we're using, the best technologies out there to provide the best experience based on the current technology. Well, great. I don't see any other questions, I don't think. If you have them, do reach out to us at Poppulo. We'd be happy to discuss them with you or connect you with the right representatives. So, well, thank you everybody for joining our webinar today. Thank you so much to our guest speakers, Sanjay and Dave. That was a really insightful presentation into what's possible with AI, and always great to see what that actually looks like inside of a product like Poppulo. So thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.